So top 10 most asked questions at HubSpot. And the primary reason for doing this video is because HubSpot is one of the few companies that actually do have a culture code that they invested a lot of work into, and which they also link to while screening you on the behavioral part of the interview. So in other words, most of the time when they ask you a behavioral question, they will link that to something from their culture code, which I also exemplify throughout my video. Now, on number 10, we have how do you prioritize work? And this question, has different answers for different types of roles, right? For software development engineer, it will be quite different from an account manager. But I believe the main reason why they ask you this question is because they want to see how you use your good judgment. And but this, of course, links to HubSpot culture code to we favor autonomy and take ownership. So your answer should exhibit these behaviors. On number 9, tell me about the time when you faced a conflict at work. And the reason why someone would ask you this, especially in a behavioral interview, is because they want to see your interpersonal skills. How do you handle, for example, a conflict with a colleague? Now, strictly behaviorally speaking, I would encourage you to earn someone's trust whenever you have a conflict or whenever you have a more difficult conversation. But if I'd have to link this with the HubSpot culture code, this would be, we believe our best perk is amazing people. And this is a pretty significant one. And you can be sure that you will be tested on interpersonal skills in these behavioral interviews. On number 8, what's your greatest strength and weakness? Your greatest strength is very important to prepare for any job interview because that's that should be the main thing you'd sell throughout your job interview if you think about it, including for software development engineers here. And the primary reason you prepare your weakness is because you don't want to leave this one unprepared, especially because it's pretty commonly asked at HubSpot. By the way, here are some examples should you need them for the weakness part. Number 7, if you were given the role, what would be the one thing that you would least like to do in the role, right? So what would be the most uncomfortable thing you'd do for the role? So needless to say, here they ask you this question because they want to see on whether you can admit that some parts would be uncomfortable. But I believe also one of the reasons why they ask you this is because they want to see how you react to uncomfortable questions and maintain your positivity. There's one item in the culture code. We recognize that life is short, so it should be fulfilling and fun. Work is a big part of life, so work should also be fulfilling and fun. So keep this one in mind while answering this question. On number 6, what's an interesting book that you read, or what have you learned from a recent book that you have read? Now, truth be said, I don't expect this question to get asked for a software development engineer, maybe unless it's a very senior role and they expect you to read books. But I found nonetheless that this is quite an interesting one that you might want to prepare as well. On number 5, tell me something that I should know that is not in your CV. In my opinion, you should definitely be prepared to advertise yourself with a lot more than it's in your CV. And maybe if you would want to talk about your greatest success, maybe there's not all the elements of your greatest success mentioned in that CV. Maybe there's something there that you would want to ensure that they know about you. But I believe this question makes very much sense in order to find how you think, how you eventually dare to be a little different here in your approach. Number 4, what are the 3 main characteristics of a great salesperson or account executive or business development? Anyway, it's a non-tech. So here this is a very, very commonly asked question at HubSpot for these types of roles. And I would very much encourage you to not only prepare the 3 characteristics, but also how you showcased, examples of a time when you showcased these characteristics. Tell me about the time when you failed at something and what you learned from it. So why would someone ask you such a question in a job interview, in a behavioral interview? Well, they ask you this because primarily of 2 reasons. The first reason is because they want to see on whether you can acknowledge that you sometimes fail, as we all do. And the second reason is they want to see what you learned from your mistakes. So these will be the 2 main reasons. And I can tell you from the start that if you're just getting started with these behavioral interviews, it will not be very easy for you to come up with failures. And I would even argue that it will take you 3 failures to find a proper failure that you could take ownership of if you want. Another piece of advice here, keep in mind that the best answers to behavioral questions, especially for these types, for mid-level, entry-level roles, but even for more senior roles, is to template them using the STAR format. So particularly for a failure story, I would recommend you to spend half of your answer on the results part. In other words, your learnings from that failure, simply because that's, the second, that they ask you the failure story first because they want to see if you have one, and second because what you learn from it. So that's why what you learn from it should be half of your answer, in my opinion. On number 2, we have tell me about your experience. And if you're a software engineer, you should read this question as, what are your highlights in your career? What are some of your proudest accomplishments? Right, so you should focus on your strength, and I have other videos, in fact, on my channel where I give you different strategies to answer these tell me about yourself types of questions. And the first and most commonly asked question at HubSpot is why HubSpot? Unsurprisingly, and this could also be why you. Actually planning to do a separate video especially on this topic. Because I will give you a couple of ideas and tips and tricks on how do you link these with the HubSpot culture code and various other strategies on how to answer them. So all in all, I find that the behavioral part of the interview at HubSpot is a very important one and very relevant one. Also from the feedback that I looked on Glassdoor. So I'd very much encourage you to, again, start with your stories, prepare 5 to 10 stories of the highlights in your career, both positive and negative, if at all possible, and only then try to perfection answers to specific questions, to specific highlights from the stories that you're using. The best candidates in these behavioral interviews all have the best possible stories. Of course, it's also about communication, and I also have a free roleplay service if you want to try it out. But the main thing you should start here is your stories. The better the stories you have for a behavioral interview, let's say you have 10 stories, the better the chances that your answer will be the highest possible quality. So don't target to answer as many questions as possible, but try to answer them as good as possible in the first place. So hopefully you found this interesting, and thank you very much for watching.